Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. This show was recorded on December 6, 2022. I'm Asbed Bedrossian and I'm here with Hovik Manucharyan. Here are the major topics we'll touch on today. We explore the complex diplomatic dance continuing around the status of Nagorno-Karabakh following the CSTO summit in Yerevan. Then we explore why Artsakh President Arayik Harutyunyan laid off pretty much the entire ministerial core of his government and what that means for incoming State Minister Ruben Vardanyan. Finally, we'll talk about Armenia's parliamentary opposition starting to fragment and lose direction and what that means for Armenia. To talk about these issues, we have with us Arthur G. Martirosyan, who is a senior consultant with CM Partners. In 1994, after graduating from Yale University, he joined Conflict Management Group and the Harvard Negotiation Project and has since worked on conflicts in the former Soviet Union, Middle East, the Balkans, Africa, and Latin America. Hello and welcome, Arthur. Thank you for joining us today. Hello, Arthur.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we had a week off, and a lot has been happening since then. So let's just jump straight into it. The major development that happened about 2 weeks ago was the CSTO debacle in Yerevan. The Armenian side essentially vetoed a measure of aid to Armenia because it didn't include, according to the Armenian government, it didn't include the necessary verbiage. We assume, I guess, condemnation of Azerbaijan's invasion of Armenian territory. And as a result, essentially, the entire package of measures, including the final declaration, was effectively vetoed by Armenia. In general, the instrument of veto has been utilized 2 times in the history of CSTO, and both times by Armenia. The previous time it was when Armenia vetoed Stanislav Zas's appointment after Armenia arrested General Khachaturov. Anyway, we recorded a special podcast about this with Anna Garapetyan. Check out episode 180 for that. But since we have Arthur, what is your take on what happened in Yerevan at the CSTO meeting? What was Pashinyan's goal? And do you think that kind of sort of posturing is, just like sort of good negotiation tactics? And what can be achieved from this?
Well, negotiators always start with the good outcome, define the good outcome. What's your goal? What do you want to get out of it? And I think judging from what Pashinyan put out as a kind of theatrics, it was mostly targeting the Armenian audience, his electorate and audience, to show them that he is the tough guy who can say no to Russians and all others. So it was immediately picked up by pro-government media that this is unprecedented, favorite word of Pashinyan, unprecedented when Armenian leader can say no to CSTO, essentially to Russia. Now, if we look at it as from the perspective of gains and losses for Armenia from that kind of posturing, certainly I would support vetoing any text or wording coming out of CSTO that would not condemn Shia aggression from Azerbaijan. On the surface, it's obvious. If you are not condemning the aggression, the other side, its reading of the situation is they're not going to condemn it next time either. Right, so it's kind of a green light, and that was the explanation that the government was offering the Armenian population. From the other hand side, I think we need to understand why we're in CSTO to begin with. What are we gaining from that membership? What should be our goal? And I think from the outset, it was obvious that CSTO, as an organization that arrives at decisions by consensus, and everybody has a veto power, would never, ever vote on something that would condemn Azerbaijan or to say nothing of taking action against Azerbaijan. And it's true that Azerbaijan has more friends in CSTO than Armenia does. That is true. Then why are we there? Why did we join in the first place? Because it allowed us to gain access to weapons, and kind of discounted internal Russian market prices on weapon systems, something that we couldn't obtain anywhere else. And if that was working and still works, then what Pashinyan is doing is not necessarily in the Armenian interest. He knew that CSTO couldn't deliver what he was asking them to deliver, right? So if I know that you cannot do that, why would I go public and still demand that you do that, knowing that you cannot? The only purpose can be to show the public that and make this a public embarrassment, to show the public that they cannot, and I'm asking them to do that. And if they don't deliver what's in the Armenian interest, I'm not going to sign it. Yes, I mean, a condemnation of the aggression would be important, but equally important is obtaining military equipment, continuing educating and training Armenian officers who have to use these weapon systems. Now, one could argue that it's no longer the same in terms of weapon supplies. Russia itself needs some of the weapon system that Armenia has been asking to buy and whatnot. That may be true. I'm not into the military procurement theme. But if that is true, and if you're not gaining that, if you're not gaining anything from CSTO, then you have to make a move and say, I don't want to be part of this at all, right? Because it's not working for interest. And then just tell Russians that we're going to continue our cooperation on the bilateral basis because this doesn't work for us. Why is he not doing that then? I think there are still some gains that he's hoping to get. And his way of getting those things is by putting pressure on them, right? So kind of hard bargainer who can corner you if need be to get more out of you. And that tactic may work, but I think it has its limits. It's you cannot play those games with Russians, especially once Russians get out of this Ukraine story either way, right? Because they will not forget what you were doing when they were in their weakest point, when they really needed you to be by them. So they will remember that. That we know from their previous behavior. They never forget how you behaved in their understanding disloyally to them by not supporting some of the things in the UN or not really voting against some of the resolutions that were harmful, although not really because General Assembly resolutions are not only have recommendation power, they're not being enforced. Not that even Security Council resolutions have been enforced in recent decades. So overall, I think he gained something and he must have lost something in this CSTO story. And my to sum up this, he gained something for his internal political kind of supporters to yet again say he is our guy and he is tough when Armenia needs to be tough, even with Russia and with anybody else. And that may also be something that he may try to sell to Europeans and Americans, but I don't think they would buy that unless you really moved out of the CSTO, unless you really severed your relations with Russia on the bilateral basis. As long as you have those things, it doesn't matter how critical you are within the CSTO. Okay, NATO has countries that are critical of NATO. Sometimes they do not support, sometimes they do not vote as all others do. But that doesn't change much in terms of the organizational capacity or organizational position.
And it's not like Armenia has so many bargaining chips. I think for us, the stakes are very high, which makes it, I guess, equally more important that you don't make any mistakes in these negotiations. The reason I brought this question up for CSTO is because it's important for our next question and in the narrative of the Armenian-Russian relations. So Foreign Minister Lavrov made a bombshell announcement last week about the status of Artsakh. And the background to that is, if our listeners remember, going back to early November, prior to the lead up of the Trilateral Summit in Sochi, Russian President Putin had thrown some hints that Russia supports a peace treaty where the status of Artsakh is postponed for future generations. That was not an accidental statement, and it was echoed by various Russian policymakers afterwards. Nothing substantive obviously was reached in Sochi, and the bland, I would say, in my opinion, bland statement was signed, underscoring points around which there was agreement, but major points such as the possible extension of the mandate of the Russian peacekeepers, explicit mention that the status of Artsakh remains open, clarity around the status of roads connecting to, Azerbaijan to Nakhichevan remained unresolved. And fast forward to I guess end of last week, after the CSTO debacle, as I said, Lavrov is now telling a much different story. When asked about the outcome of the Sochi meeting and the status of Artsakh, Lavrov said that both Armenia and Azerbaijan have agreed to base their peace agreement on the 1991 Alma-Ata Declaration, which was the founding document for the Commonwealth of Independent States. He said that because Armenia and Azerbaijan had agreed to this in Prague and basically came to Sochi with that agreement in hand, Russia's hands were tied and they couldn't do anything. However, Lavrov's interpretation of this fact drew a lot of objection from the Armenian circles because Lavrov basically said that the Alma-Ata Accords include mutual recognition of territorial integrity of the signatories, which means that Artsakh or Karabakh will be part of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan will guarantee the security of its Armenian population. So the question is, how do you, I guess, interpret what Lavrov said last week and earlier this week, and the apparent about-face in Russia's public policy about the status of Artsakh?
I don't think Lavrov said anything that we didn't know before. Starting from the conversations and discourse in Armenia about the so-called Lavrov plan. I mean, everybody knew what Russians have been proposing for almost a decade now, right? And in their book, it's a kind of postponed status, gets the territories, some territories back to Azerbaijan, and then keep the corridors, including Kelbajar and Lachin, and then work on the kind of trust building and economic cooperation, and only then go to the status issue. Kind of the practiced in the world, in some cases, Alsace-Lorraine, a number of other areas where the decision on the status was postponed and decided later. So that was the Russian plan all along. There's nothing new about it. What was new was that Lavrov went public, and he has done that only several times, and all these times coincide with Pashinyan's tenure as the prime minister in Armenia, right? So publicly stating, kind of throwing aside diplomatic verbiage and calling a spade a spade. So he's essentially saying that it was in the Russian interest to keep the status postponed. It's obvious why, because Russians want to keep the peacekeeping operation there. Their presence in the region is through that peacekeeping, and therefore they. The longer is postponed the decision on the status, the longer they're going to have the presence there. That's obvious. It's in their interest. Now, why did he have to go public now and do that? Because he saw that Pashinyan is playing this game of blaming then Russia for not acting more forcefully, Russia not doing things. And he said, well, this is your leadership. They went to Prague and almost agreed with Aliyev on something that makes us as mediators, it makes it very difficult for us to now
irrelevant
pressure on Azerbaijan and say, accept the status of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh as postponed. Why? Because Pashinyan and Aliyev have agreed that Pashinyan is ready to recognize the sovereignty of Azerbaijan over Artsakh. and that was done behind the Russians' back. So Pashinyan has done it. That's what he. That's why he's kind of trying to tell the Armenians, speaking to the Armenian public, that is Lavrov, and saying, "Look at what your leader is doing.
Yeah.
Even if he wanted to now, it's going to be very difficult because if Armenia agrees with Azerbaijan that Artsakh is part of Azerbaijan, who can persuade Aliyev that the status needs to be decided later? Even if Armenia is saying it's part of Azerbaijan, why the status should be decided later? That's kind of the rhetoric and the argument. And I don't know what went on in Prague, why Pashinyan decided to make that move. What did he get from Aliyev, or what did he get from Erdogan and Aliyev that he decided to make that statement? That he was ready to make that statement. He's been saying that all along. He was the one who said that there is no Armenia beyond Tergyu. That is the village on the formerly border of Armenia and administrative border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So he was the one who was saying that let Karabakh Armenians, Artsakh Armenians negotiate the status directly with Azerbaijan. So if they are the ones to negotiate the status with Azerbaijan, and that's what Aliyev is essentially saying, I would not tolerate anyone interfering. I will directly negotiate with them. And he doesn't want to grant them a status. And he does everything. He has all the levers to put pressure on Artsakh so that this struggle for maintaining independent status, or any status for that matter, is going to be extremely difficult. And the Armenian side essentially has washed off hands and said, okay, you deal with that. And that's what Lavrov is calling. I mean, he's saying this is the situation.
It all makes sense. The only thing I would have to add is that when Putin was talking about, hey, we still see the future of Artsakh potentially like sort of open and so forth, he already knew the outcome in Prague. So do you believe that this was like effort by Putin to talk to the Armenian public, or were there some serious efforts by Russians to change the course of the negotiations that failed for whatever reason?
Look, Russia is a mediator in this setting, right? This structure. Russia hasn't taken the position of an arbiter. Often Armenians make they confuse one with the other, right? So the arbiter tells the parties what the solution is going to be, just like Madeleine Albright told Milosevic and the Serbs in Rambouillet that this is the solution for Kosovo, accept it, or we're going to bomb hell out of you. And that's the arbiter, right? The arbiter. Now, did the arbiter have a mandate to do that or not? I mean, that's, I'm not going to go into that conversation right now. The arbiter decides and enforces the decision. The mediator goes to the parties to find a solution that would work for both of them, which is much more difficult, right? So if Russia is mediating, and Russia has its own interests as a mediator, right? And one of the interests is to keep the peacekeeping in the region. Russians see that Russian interest is being sabotaged. On surface, Pashinyan is saying, oh, Russia, isn't it in your interest to have the peacekeepers for quite a long time? Therefore, if it's in your interest, we're asking you to raise this issue at the meeting with Aliyev and make sure that that happens. And this is nonsense, because Russians know that they have to go to Aliyev, and Aliyev is in a very strong position now to say, no, I don't want this. I don't want this. And what Russians are going to tell him, no, Armenians, and we want it, and you therefore have to accept it? No, of course not. Of course not. It's not an issue that they wanted to be raised at this point. And Pashinyan was raising it, either because he is very uncouth as a diplomat, or because he again wanted Russians to look foolish, because he's saying, isn't it in your interest? If the proposal that you have made on Artsakh with the status postponed is yours, why cannot you enforce that? Why cannot you impose it on Azerbaijan? And the answer is, again, Russians are saying, we're not an arbiter to do that. We cannot impose it on them. We could have played it differently had you not sided with Aliyev in the first place. So for Russians, it looks like Pashinyan and Aliyev have made a kind of a side deal where they are working against Russians on this one. It may sound strange, but that's how they've read it. And that's why Lavrov would not go public with his statements without first checking with Putin. And he gave him a get-go. So tell this, not to Pashinyan, because to Pashinyan he could say directly, or through Mirzoyan, through not open channels, right? Diplomats don't do that. Once you go public, you are addressing this issue to the Armenian public, so that the issue is not going to be manipulated and Russians again be scapegoated. So Pashinyan can say, oh, see, we asked Russians to do that, to enforce the very proposal that they have, the package on the table they have, and they didn't do it. So Russians have to be blamed for that. And I'm saying no, because you made the wrong move. Either deliberately, again, if you had that agenda on your mind, or because you are uncouth. You don't ask the mediator to do something because, and publicly, because the mediator has to consult with both sides. They cannot unilaterally decide that. So the Russian hope was that the status is not going to be decided. And if the status is not going to be decided, they're going to stay longer there. So they had their interest. Make no doubt about that. Russians have their interest.
Okay.
And in this case, it could be overlapping with our own interest, but not with Pashinyan's interest. He apparently has other interests, other agenda that he's following.
A couple of days ago, on December 3rd, a group of Azerbaijanis in civilian clothing claiming to be eco-activists were able to block the Shushi-Karindag segment of the Goris-Stepanakert highway, effectively blockading all traffic between Armenia and Artsakh. After 3 hours of negotiations with the Russian peacekeepers, including their commander, Andrei Volkov, the road was reopened and the provocateurs continued negotiations with the Russian peacekeepers at the Russian base near Ivanyan. So later, I think this was the day after, Azerbaijani press identified these individuals as employees of the Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources of the Republic of Azerbaijan, as well as employees of Azergold. The entire blockade operation was accompanied by Azerbaijani media, yet, Armenian media was not allowed to even enter Lachin corridor from the Armenian side. This was preceded by weeks of Azerbaijani press reports about so-called violations in the Lachin corridor, including allegations that Armenians were transporting military equipment, including mines, gold, which Azerbaijan claimed it is exploiting illegally. Even the alleged presence of 14 Iranians in Artsakh was brought up. All the while, the Azerbaijani government press was blasting the Russian peacekeepers in the press for using Armenian place names for the official reports. So at the end, there were some ambiguous statements made by the head of the Russian peacekeepers about agreements to open a mini customs checkpoint to aid the work of the peacekeepers. The details are yet unknown. Arthur, why did Azerbaijan temporarily close the Lachin corridor? What was the goal of this whole altercation and buildup?
Well, I think we need to view this as part of their overall strategy, which is getting clearer and clearer. I mean, we had, at least I'm sure that several other people have been talking about that for some time now. Their strategy is to use every leverage they have to pressure Armenians in Artsakh to accept not only Azerbaijani sovereignty over Artsakh, but to make sure that no conversation of status is going to be happening. Now, I was there when this happened. I was in Artsakh. And it was obvious that one of the targets of this tactical game was Ruben Vartanian himself, because the Azeri media for a week or more, they were writing about Ruben Vartanian having interest in the mining in Durham and the mining industry in general. And we remember how Aliyev described him as a person with whom he's not going to be negotiating with, because he's been appointed by Moscow and he's been plundering Russian citizens. And
right.
that's
He was
how
called an agent of Moscow.
Right. So, in other words, putting pressure on Ruben Vartanian and choosing a topic and the theme that is going to be resonating with many Europeans, especially green and ecologically minded people, because what they're saying is Armenians are excavating some metals and gold here, and they are not following the standards. We want to make sure it's happening on our territory. We want to make sure that we have access to the data on pollution and other ecological parameters that they want to get, right? And so what they've been negotiating with Russians was if they what would be the process of getting that kind of data, right? So if they needed that kind of data, how they can obtain it, not from the Armenian side, but sending their experts who can on location do all the measurements and collect that data.
There was even a report that said that they had entered Stepanakert, but I don't see any kind of confirmation or anything from the Armenian side.
They went to the headquarters, which is formerly Khojali and Khojalu, and now it's Ivanyan. That's where the Russian peacekeepers' headquarters are. Obviously, that also annoyed many Armenians, because some were saying, when I was in Stepanakert, some were saying or expecting that Russians should employ force to kind of reopen communication if need be. But obviously, Russians wouldn't do that. They wanted to find a kind of peaceful solution to this. The message and the goal that Azerbaijani specialists or the Western or other advisors who work for them had was to communicate this to the Armenian side. We can close this road, and we do not need tanks or military to close it. We can find a way of kind of a civil society action. The environmental groups are concerned, and they're staging protests, right? And these protests can be bigger, more sizable. They can find other issues or pretext to block the road. And each time the Russian side now, if they see that Armenians are not acting too proactively, they're not mobilizing to protect their own interests, then so be it. Let Azerbaijanis provoke them to a degree where it will be intolerable.
Right. Yeah.
So back to Azerbaijani strategy, though, if you look at Artsakh as kind of from the economic prospects, the mining industry is probably the largest taxpayer and also the largest employer. If you put enough pressure to suspend the activities of these mines or do something, then quite a few Armenians are going to find themselves unemployed, right? And what is left, and there is also the agriculture, but agriculture is also depending on water and even electricity, because many are using the hothouses, right? And hothouses use electricity. So if you can put more pressure on them, then essentially they either will have to agree with Azeri demands at the negotiation table, or go to their worsening alternatives, right? And their hope is that they will find Armenians who would say, we've had enough. Armenia is not supporting us. the so-called international community is not supporting, only speaking about support, but not really supporting us. Let's deal with Azeris directly and deal on the terms that they are putting on. That's their hope. I'm not saying they're going to get it immediately. Maybe they are looking at is there some there are some candidates for that. That definitely is not Ruben Vartanian. He's not one who can play into their strategy. Therefore, they are looking. They probably are thinking of somebody else from among Karabakh Armenians, maybe, who can play that role. I don't know if they're going to be successful, but it's clearly part of their strategy.
Okay.
And to close off this topic of Azerbaijan-Armenia negotiations, amidst all that took place over the last few weeks, a meeting that was planned to take place between Aliyev and Pashinyan in Brussels was cancelled by Aliyev. In justifying it, Aliyev said that Pashinyan had insisted that France should take part in this meeting, similar to the format that was held in Prague, where it was a four-way, Armenia, Azerbaijan, EU, and France. To remind our listeners, the upper house in France passed a resolution 2 weeks ago condemning Azerbaijan for various things, including POWs, aggression against Armenia, and so forth. So many see Aliyev's rejection of Macron's participation as a payback for that resolution. Now, my question is, what was Pashinyan's calculation in demanding Macron's presence, and why was it so important, essentially? What does Macron bring to the table in these negotiations? And, is there hope that there will be a so-called peace treaty by the end of the year still? Because, Azerbaijan has made an ultimatum about that. And in general, how do you see the prospect of these negotiations moving forward?
It's a very complex game that Aliyev is playing. He first agreed to the Brussels track, and he used that to demonstrate to Russians that Armenians are not loyal to Moscow. They are playing behind your back. Now he can pull out of Brussels, not losing anything, and Pashinyan now insisting that he would want that meeting to go forward. So for Aliyev, it's an opportunity to, again, speak to Russians and say, see, it was, after all, I just couldn't say no because there was no reason for me not to participate in that process. But the minute I saw it's going in the wrong direction, I pulled out. But Pashinyan is really the one who wanted it. And Pashinyan continues to play with Europeans. So he played that game that way. Now, obviously, he's not going to sign anything unless Armenia agrees to his demands. And his demands are not only recognition of Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan. I think Pashinyan is ready to sign that. It's not going to be the biggest problem for him. The biggest problem for him is going to be the corridor, because he continues to insist that there should be a corridor. It's kind of in his framing of this game, it's a quid pro quo. That's why he's putting pressure on the Lachin corridor, right? And he is now saying, I gave you, which is not exactly that way. I built very quickly this road. He got Berzor and Aradno and built a segment of the road that connects still Armenia and Artsakh. And he's saying, in exchange, the reciprocal move should be a corridor to Nakhichevan. That is unacceptable for Pashinyan, primarily because he's put so much of his energy into this, and also because he understands it's not going to be acceptable for Iranians, it's not going to be acceptable for Russians, and it's going to significantly limit Armenia's capability to maneuver in this new configuration that Turks and Azeris are trying to impose on Armenia. He's trying to resist to that. And I don't think it's going to be resolved. I mean, I certainly do not know much about what's going on there, but we have only several weeks left before the end of the year.
Yeah.
I don't see it being signed, much as Pashinyan wanted to see it signed. Aliyev doesn't need to be in a rush to sign anything right now. There's no pressure on him to sign anything. He will continue to use the leverage that he has, including military build-up, including all the leverage that he has on Artsakh, continue to put pressure to make sure that he's going to get what he wants. He still hopes that he's going to achieve that, and therefore, until he gets really persuaded that that's impossible, that it's going to be costly for him if he doesn't sign the agreement and run the delimitation demarcation and kind of close the entire thing. And I don't see who's going to be pressuring him to do that very fast. Now, even Russians now, can see this as their opportunity to still work on dragging the status issue and dragging the issue of their peacekeepers. Because remember, Putin, when he was asked, right, why not do something that is in Russia's interest, he said, well, we don't see it as in Russia's interest right now. When we get to that point, we'll see if the sides still need us, right, as peacekeepers. And he's going to make sure that the sides are still going to be in the need of the peacekeepers, including Karabakh Armenians. But for that, he doesn't need Armenia. He will be doing it on his own. And that's a very kind of dangerous game that Armenia has been dragged into. Could we have avoided this game? Probably. I don't know all the details, but it looks like some people miscalculated, essentially miscalculated what's happening in this bigger game of Russia versus West, Russia, Ukraine, and they thought that Russia is weakened beyond repair, and therefore it's time to be kind of more aggressive in pushing alternative, right? And the alternative game was, if you Russians are not going to do that, if the CSTO is not going to do that, if it's not going to be happening with you guys, then we'll go to Europeans and Americans, and they will do that. The problem with this alternative game, and I've been saying this all along, is that if the alternative is not real, if the West and if Americans are not really going to deliver, then it's going to be much more difficult for you to go back to Russians again. They do even small things for us. Because now Russians are going to opt for doing what's in their interest on their own, not relying anymore on you. And that's really dangerous for us.
Okay, on to our next topic. On November 23rd, President of Artsakh, Arayik Harutyunyan, dismissed most of the ministers of his government. He also recalled a bill to amend the constitution of Artsakh, pending further political consultations in the country. All this came on the heels of his appointment of Ruben Vardanyan as his state minister, replacing Artsakh Beglaryan earlier in November. Since then, there have been statements from Baku that they're willing to talk to Nagorno-Karabakh leadership, but not with Vardanyan, whom they called, as you mentioned, an agent of Moscow, basically. Vardanyan, of course, replied that he will be the one to negotiate with Baku, and only in an internationally supported format and not a bilateral format. Arthur, what are your thoughts on the reshuffle of the government of Artsakh? Was the dismissal the result of performance, competence, or simply to give Vardanyan an opportunity to set up a new government and carry out his new vision?
Well, from what I understand, I mean, Ruben Vardanyan is a technocrat. I mean, he looks at this situation, and if you measure performance of the government, he can see a number of inefficiencies. And it's true that the government of Artsakh is bloated. the challenge that he has is not kind of corporate governance here. It's not easy to fire people without facing some consequences. The problem is also in the mindset of many Karabakh Armenians, and that is, I don't know, it comes from the Soviet times. They prefer to be in the state service, right? Not in the private sector, but in the public sector, because it gives them the prestige, it gives them status, and whatever is related or comes out of that.
Right.
And therefore, kind of significantly reducing the government, and that might be necessary to make it more efficient. He may run into problems, especially if he keeps bringing specialists. I mean, theoretically, it would be a correct move, right? I mean, I'm bringing the best who can do the job. And I'm not looking where they're from. If they are from Karabakh, they will be from Karabakh. But if, he doesn't want to have his hands tied, from what I understand. So if he can bring people from Moscow or from Yerevan,
diaspora, anywhere.
Well, anywhere in the world, he's willing to bring, although saying anywhere in the world might be challenging. It's not easy to get in and out of Artsakh without Armenian passport. But it's still possible, I mean, to some degree. I mean, so he may find his way of handling that. And the question then will be, you know, because the Karabakh politics of who gets what, when, and how is very much tied to who's represented in the government, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's bloated in the first place, right? So he may go after efficiency, and he may get sooner or later people in numbers opposed, not opposed to what he's doing. He may be even successful, modestly, or even greatly successful in what he's doing. But they will still be opposed because they are not in the government. Their clan is not in the government, and so forth. So this is a kind of landmine that he needs to navigate, or a sea mine that he needs to navigate and find his way to the ports.
Arthur, I was going to ask, because you're a negotiations specialist, can you talk a little bit about the subtlety between, well, it's not so subtle, the negotiation tactic of Vartanian saying that it must be in an international format and not necessarily in a bilateral format. In fact, bilateral format, he said, is not acceptable.
Well, I mean, here's the problem. It may not be him who will have to negotiate. It may be other Armenians who will have to negotiate.
Okay.
And they may not negotiating with Aliyev, but whoever is responsible for this or that sphere, whether that's electric power, water, gas, the roads, right? There are so many issues. So if you are the head of the government, you may say, I'm not negotiating with the Azerbaijanis, only in the international setting, some international setting. Fine, but they are negotiating. And as far as I know, some of the negotiations have taken place on issues of interest to various players in Artsakh. So, yes, he may insist on that. But when is the international setting, or the mediators are going to be convene a session with him involved, right? And I think part of the challenge is going to be, yes, it's he's been appointed following the constitution of Artsakh. It's a decision that the president can make, right? Appointing a new state minister. But formally and technically, it's, you know, when you talk about democratic process, he's, you know, and that's why Aliyev is trying to exploit that. And when he says he's a Russian agent, that is not a message sent to Ruben per se. That is a message sent to the Western mediators, right? Saying he's Moscow's man, and I don't want to negotiate with Moscow's man. So what we're going to end up with, either no negotiations happen, which is most likely, right? Aliyev definitely is not going to sit down with Ruben Vartanian. Not even send anyone low ranking in his government to sit down with Ruben Vartanian, because he has already said it's not going to be happening, and it's a face saving issue, right? He's going to lose face if he or any senior representative of his government sits down with Ruben Vartanian and talks. So what Ruben Vartanian is implying here is that his strategy for what negotiators call legitimacy of entry. Legitimacy of entry is why you should be talking to me in the first place. You will be talking to me if you can see that you're going to be losing something if you don't, or you are gaining something that you otherwise cannot get negotiating with me, one of the two, or somebody is putting pressure on you so that you accept me as a negotiator at the table. So from what Ruben Vartanian is saying, it looks like he's opting for the third option, which is let the international community pressure Aliyev so that he accepts him as a negotiator. But I don't think the international community, especially Europeans with their interest in Azerbaijan and the US with the interest in Azerbaijan, are going to be pressuring Aliyev to sit down and talk to Ruben Vartanian. So that's why I give the scenario of no talks, direct talks. But as I said, it doesn't rule out that talks will be happening at different levels in various spheres where the parties are going to have mutual interest and where Aliyev is going to continue to put pressure on Artsakh.
I also noticed that all of the spheres that you mentioned had to do with segments of the economy, for example, energy or water and things like that. And I'm putting that thought together with the fact that when Ruben Vartanian was appointed as state minister, the portfolio was expanded to almost everything except the defense ministry. So the defense being out of the sphere of his, let's say, authority. And the fact that all of these negotiations are going to be about spheres, which I would call maybe integration of Nagorno-Karabakh into Azerbaijan. Are we supposed to draw some kind of conclusion that this is all about giving Artsakh over?
Well, it's very complicated because it also depends on whether Armenia is going to sign this agreement with Azerbaijan and what will be the terms of the agreement. I've been saying this for some time now. If they sign the agreement and if they say that they recognize Azerbaijan's sovereignty over Artsakh, then Azerbaijan will not only have a carte blanche to put significant pressure on Artsakh, but it can raise issues that will be gaining international support even, right? So if you are saying that this is my territory, question, what is your money doing on my territory? What are your banks doing on my territory? What are your passports doing on my territory? Or other documents from education, certificates to driver's licenses.
Right. We talked about all this on our previous shows.
Right. So, I mean, all of the, you opening up all of the possibilities for him to start putting pressure. He is now talking about building a pipeline that will go through from Agdam through Mardakert. Stepanakert and Mardakert. Mm-hmm. And that will be the pipeline, gas pipeline. And he's going to be saying, here, I'm going to provide you with natural gas. But you will have to pay for it in manats, not in dollars, not in drams, but in manats. So there are so many different ways. And sometimes people say, oh, you're saying that, are you siding with Aliyev? Of course not. I'm just saying I'm putting myself in the shoes of Aliyev, not even in his shoes, but in the shoes of the advisors. And I know who's employed there, who's operating there. And I'm saying it would be silly if they didn't put on the table a memo for him what to do and how to continue pressuring the Armenian side, the Artsakh.
As a very quick last question, we are in a situation where we're seeing that the Armenian parliamentary opposition has returned to the deliberative hall of the parliament and is now taking part in the sort of regular day-to-day voting and deliberations on issues. Although there's some fragmentation, we've seen parties leave. For instance, Reborn Armenia has left the Armenia Alliance, and Hydenic Party has left the Bativunem. We want to understand what is the opposition's potential right now to achieve its stated goals, which still remain, I guess, regime change or removal of Pashinyan from power. Is it just sort of, now more fantasy than before? And how would you evaluate the status quo in terms of balance of power between the Armenian government and the opposition?
Well, I think it was obvious for me that going into the elections after the country went through the defeat in the war was a mistake, because by participating, you are legitimizing already. But the opposition parties decided that they should go. They went, and they didn't achieve much. They thought that they could use the podium in Parliament as a platform for raising awareness, bringing issues to the attention of the Armenian people, and that was their agenda. Obviously, it was not working, and it couldn't work because Pashinyan's political party has constitutional majority in the parliament. They can adopt any laws, they can change anything, and I haven't seen a single law adopted in the current parliament or in the previous parliament that would be the initiative of the opposition. It's simply not happening. So why then Pashinyan needs the opposition? He needs the opposition to say that it's democracy.
Where in fact, legitimize himself. Yeah,
nothing to do with democracy. It's just a facade. It's just a kind of pretense that we have democracy. And the opposition played into that. The second issue is this fragmentation now. It further plays into the hands of Pashinyan. I don't know who from among the opposition leaders, with all due respect, has today the ethos, the reputation, the charisma that he can bring people in the streets in masses, right? I mean, it's not going to be happening. In winter, forget about it. It's not happening. Come spring, the only issue, and I've been saying this even from 2018 when people were asking, is it possible to change this regime? No, it's not possible unless there is a significant shift in the socioeconomic conditions, one. And number two, if there is a renewed threat to peace, and people may see that this is, again, getting them into the harm's way, their sons, their daughters are going to be in the harm's way. So if he can navigate between these two, he can easily go to the next elections unopposed. And in the next elections, if the opposition continues the game as it does now, they may not even be able to get enough percentage to get through the threshold to make it to the parliament. So unless another kind of political force, the third force, emerges, and Pashinyan is doing everything not to make that happen, he's going to have another term. And then I don't know how long, but he's been obviously stating that his goal is 2050. So we're going to end up the political party pretending to be democracy when it is not. and kind of rebranding, not only rebranding Armenia, but really changing the paradigm, the very foundations of the identity. That will be the new Armenia that he intends to create and to build.
Mm-hmm.
So he can be successful in that if the opposition is not going to pull their act together. If they're leaving the parliament, they should leave and not come back. If they're leaving and coming back, I'm positive that they're losing even more supporters because it's the inconsistency is not working into their hands. So I overall evaluated even worse than going to participate in the elections. Going to participate in the elections was a mistake. Now
I agree with that.
It's even a bigger mistake to be fragmented. And kind of the more they're fragmented, the easier is going to be for Pashinyan to divide and rule.
All right, let's wrap up our topics here. I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you want to talk about. Arthur?
One big disappointment that I think the entire nation lives through right now is the inability to regroup, mobilize, and we're looking up for new leaders. I don't know if Ruben Vardanyan successfully managing the Artsakh issue is going to be then positioned, and that's why I think he has some tensions with Yerevan, with Pashinyan, his group, because they might see him as a rival, right? I mean, possibly taking that third party niche that I'm talking about, because no matter what the previous regime political parties, even if they're saying the right things, I sometimes really commiserate with them. They're saying the right things. They're kind of their heart seems to be in the right place, but they are not getting any support. Right. That's part of the Armenian culture. If you lose the ethos, it's very difficult to rebuild. You are labeled, and your return to political party, the cost of redemption is going to be totally probably unacceptable in terms of how long it's going to take to get that redemption. So if I were them, I would, if they are really thinking about future of Armenia, I would think of pulling out, regrouping, creating a new force. They may be part of that force, they may not be part of that force, but I think unless there is a new force that can come up with a vision that will resonate, this is difficult part, will resonate with the majority of Armenians, inside, outside, diaspora, Armenia. So something that will resonate and be realistic enough. It shouldn't be pie in the sky. Something realistic, something tangible. We're going to miss the opportunity to mobilize. And if we're not going to be mobilized, we're going to be dragged through this period of apathy and more losses and more kind of realization that we have failed as a nation to put together a viable nation state here.
Okay.
So I would hope to see that, but I as time goes by, we're saying, oh, time, we're gaining time, and it's like you have the noose on your neck. You're negotiating with the noose on your neck, and you're saying, oh, I'm gaining some time, I can breathe. Okay, you can breathe, but still on your neck, right? You need to think, what are you doing to cut it off, to remove it, not just to gain time to breathe a little bit. Because I'm sure that if we allow them, they're going to go and achieve their goals and their strategy. And their goals are to see Armenians submissive, Armenians accepting the Turkish rule and the Turkish kind of presence in Armenia and in the entire region, and the domineering positioning in the region. So that's all I have to say. Thank you. I may
Okay.
sound pessimistic, but realists have to take it as it is, right? Without giving hope that something can be achieved and something can be done differently.
Hovik, what's on your mind?
Asbed, I know that people are going to accuse me of being Scrooge, but we have to talk about this. And yesterday was the grand opening of the Eurovision Festival, or Junior Eurovision, that's being held in Yerevan this year. It was also the grand opening of the Christmas tree at the Republic Square. All the streets were decorated with amazing lights, fireworks, concert. Probably about 100,000 people were in the streets. Just imagine the resources that went to organize all of this. Even press that normally report on Eurovision said that this was an extraordinary reception for Armenia and for Eurovision Junior in general. It was a little bit too much, in my opinion, because when you think about the situation that our country is in, when you think about our soldiers having to still sort of take refuge in plastic tents, when you think about the fact that we have POWs in Baku, when we still have families grieving over their losses over the last 2 years, when we still have families that have been forced out of their homes. And I have to say this, I mean, we still have, and I'm sorry for saying this, but we still have bodies in Girarkunik in the positions that have been captured by the Azerbaijanis that are decomposing, and the Azerbaijanis are not allowing us to retrieve those bodies. It's a little bit insensitive. It's a little bit dishonorable to have such opulent celebrations publicly. It could have been done in a more dignified way. It could have been done in a less expensive way, saving some money for our fortifying our borders. I don't know. I'm a little bit disgusted, and I don't want to blame the people that went out. I understand that this has to sort of people have to celebrate. This is not only natural, but I do blame policymakers. I do blame the planners for this, and it is an overt attempt to make us forget what's happening around us. And I'm here to remind you about that.
All right. We'll leave it there for today. Thank you, Arthur. Thanks for joining us today. That's our show this week. We hope you found it informative. Now go find us on social media and follow us. Go, go, go. We'll talk to you next week.